I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're delighted to welcome to our show a very talented author. His name is Stuart Tillman. He has written a powerful book. It is called The Story You Find Yourself In, Part 1. And he's written another book called From Genesis to Revelation, A Story You Find Yourself In. The author takes us on a raw and transformative journey through his personal and spiritual awakening. His books are a blend of introspection, biblical allegory, and a deep dive into the soul's journey, reflecting the lessons learned from a life that spiraled from the American dream into a personal nightmare at one point. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Atticus Publishing for helping us put him in the spotlight today. And we ask viewers like you to support writers like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his wonderful books. The links are below this interview. Stuart, great to see you here today on Spotlight.
Well, thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Love the title, The Story You Find Yourself In. It almost sounds like that's just kind of how life works out. You find yourself in the story. Is that kind of the etymology of that title?
Yeah, kind of backed into it. After going through, quite a tumultuous period of my life, and it kind of started, back when I was 41. Today I'm 63, and it kind of began with kind of my battle with religion, and that's kind of when it started, and and it kind of facilitated an existential crisis of sorts that I wouldn't figure out until I was really deep into it. And looking back, I can see that that's kind of where it began. And as as things progressed, I've started seeing patterns of self-destructive behavior and kind of self-sabotage and kind of the classic stuff that men in their midlife go through a midlife crisis. They kind of do that to themselves. And it's there when I learned that I had a codependent nature, which was just really foreign to me because it just sounds so weak, and I would have never have put me in that category. And so as I started to unwind that, you kind of do a deep dive into the shadow work within yourself. And when I started it, I didn't even know I was doing that. It's just looking back on it, looking at psychology and kind of self-help techniques. Yeah, I've come to realize, man, I started doing the shadow work, not even knowing that that's what I was doing. Right. And really the light bulb kind of went off with me, Logan. It was I was totally unaware of awareness. I was on such autopilot mode. And I really didn't have a mentor in my life. And really the only spiritual foundation I had was religion. And it was a very conservative denomination as well. And it's when they asked me at 41 to consider becoming an elder of the church that I went, well, it's one thing to be a servant, a deacon, but another thing to advocate for these doctrines, which I didn't really believe in. And that kind of started me spinning out, but it also affected me and my wife's relationship. And it became that thing that just caused issues. And so that realization that I was just totally unaware, and I go, why was I so oblivious? And when I really wanted to unwind it, in about a 6-month period of my life, when everything broke down, I documented everything. I journaled everything that was happening to me in my meditations, my dreams, and it helped guide me through. And then I said, I really think when I'm writing. So and I'm praying about it, and I say, hey, I think I'm going to write a book. And as I'm writing a book, Lord, I just hope you continue to show me stuff. And it happened. And in this book, this is the first book, and I think you have that.
Yeah. And
when I self-published it, I hadn't have any idea what I was doing. And I punched the 8.5 by 11, and this is what came out. I should have done the 9 by 6, obviously.
Right.
That's how oblivious I was to putting a book out there. But making that book go live was the single most courageous act that I've ever done, because it's so raw and so harsh. And I include many of my journal entries, raw journal entries in that book. And it just reveals the inner man in turmoil, because I seriously had considered suicide.
Mm.
And in the process, I kind of worked my way through that. And so with this book, I know I'm kind of rambling, but it's kind of a long story.
Sure.
And in this book, I have a part 2 and a part 3 already outlined. But as I got through it, I went, I'm finding some esoteric biblical knowledge that I'm starting to connect dots. And I found, a way to connect Genesis to Revelation. And then what I was finding in that connection was Revelation. I was coming up with an entirely different interpretation of Revelation, the book of Revelation, than what's present in modern theology. And it closely aligns with what you would see in Hinduism or Buddhism. Mm-hmm. And so before I wrote part 2 and part 3, I decided to write this book. And that's, from Genesis to Revelation, the story you find yourself in. And because it is the story we find ourselves in. The Bible is telling us the story of ourselves if you look at it esoterically. Mm-hmm. And the exoteric, the literal, kind of gives you a glimpse of what the collective humanity can produce physically, and the story of perhaps, the biblical story historically. But when you see the allegory that's underneath it all, it doesn't really matter if those events physically happened or not. They just become the foundation with which the allegory is leveraged and the characters are developed. And so I wrote this book in the form of an allegory, which the characters are the creation, the sun, the moon, a water drop, the main character, and they interact trying to figure out, what is humanity doing? What are they thinking? And what can we do to counterbalance the negative effects that they're having? And so as I wrote that book, I came up with this very different interpretation of Revelation, and it's all about what's happening inside of us. And then I have a sequel planned for that one. But as I got finished with that one, I went, man, I really like what I'm seeing in this allegory. It started to come alive. And I found the word matrix that's presented in the first part of Genesis that helps you to see this allegory unfold. And so yesterday, I just finished the transcript for my third book. And this is Genesis and the hidden allegory of man's descent into the matrix, the story you find yourself in. And I have 3 sequels planned for this book. So everything that I've done up to this point has led to this third book. And it's the allegory of the Bible. And it's absolutely fascinating. I would have never imagined that I would be a guy that would do what I'm doing. It's just not in my DNA.
What do you think the takeaway for readers is? You start with your personal story, of course, in part 1, and then you expand out to the biblical stories. Are you hoping that someone who finds themselves in a crisis like you were in at one point finds relief, finds, a commonality?
There's a story in the Bible that is the story of a midlife crisis, and that's the story of Job. Mm-hmm. And it's just a fascinating book when you really learn how to peel it back esoterically. And I feel like I kind of went through a Job journey where, if it's your time to have an awakening, a spiritual experience, and you're not ready, but you're chosen to have that, then you're going to experience the wrath of God and the wrath of Yahweh, because he wants that for you. But if you were aware of awareness and you could proactively, intentionally pursue spirituality with an idea of what is the end game and what's expected of me, then I think it's possible to navigate that journey with that intention without having to experience so much pain and so much carnage and so much collateral damage. And so that really the fundamental message is just to become aware of awareness, is that we're made a certain way, to begin this journey. Every one of us, it's the same thing. It's the natural body that the Apostle Paul speaks of. And the entire Old Testament is the story of us in the natural body journey, which is to partake of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The New Testament is the journey into the spiritual body, what the Apostle Paul speaks of. And that is to partake of the tree of life. And we start with the first Adam, and that is Adam, and that's a single consciousness in the allegory. And that consciousness has a male, a masculine, and a feminine construct to it. The male is named Adam, and the female is named Eve. And so the allegory is a story of one single consciousness. It's the inner man picture of what that looks like inside. And the Bible is basically a description of thoughts and of feelings, fiefdoms in our body that produce errant thoughts. And then we have a last Adam that comes along and it takes us the rest of the way, and that would be Jesus. And the entity that's with us all the way through the journey is Yahweh, the Old Testament, and it's Christ in the New Testament. And that's our consciousness. Our consciousness is of Yahweh, is of Christ. And so, yeah, if we just, religion hasn't done a very good job of preparing us for an awakening event. And in fact, in Christianity, it's not talked about at all. And so if a person had some knowledge or some awareness in that area, then they could be more intentional about how they manage their spirituality. So that's kind of what I hope to bring to bear.
Absolutely. Now, in the book, of course, you do discuss awakening and enlightenment. Was there one defining moment in your personal awakening?
Yeah, I would say there were two very significant events that happened, that I documented and that I included in the first book. And I've also included some of these journal entries in the second and in this third book, the relevant ones. But if you look at the Bible, there's in 2 Thessalonians 2, there's a section of scripture that says, and your awakening isn't going to happen until you see the apostasy. And traditional Christianity they're looking at, the apocalypse and, when all, the Battle of Armageddon goes down. But the allegory, the apostasy is the first image that we have. It's our ego self image of the natural body. And that's the image that we have to trade for the spiritual image. And in that process, that awakening, your ability to see that part of your nature, you have to see that before you can awaken. And I had a vision that I was in a confrontation with this other thing. I named it the beast. And then in my journal entry, I said, well, who's this guy watching the beast? Who is this other and who is that guy? But that guy wants to kill me. He wants to see me gone. But why? And so I had this inner battle going on. And that was the first time that I really had a conscious awareness that there's two natures within me warring, and that one has to die, one has to go, so the other one can resurrect. That's the crucifixion of that first image, so that awakened, Christed image can resurrect. And that's the whole biblical allegory, and that's the symbolism behind the life and the events of Jesus. It doesn't really matter. I mean, this is blasphemous and sacrilegious, but it doesn't really matter if the physical events actually happen, if you understand the symbolism esoterically, because we're intended to go through that same experience. And so that was my first one.
Yep.
And then my second one was really when everything totally collapsed. It was a complete ego dissolution. And I had a series of visions and meditation and experiences where I would revisit childhood situations vis-a-vis me and my dad, because that's where my big wound came from.
Yeah.
And all my siblings have been affected similarly. And so in that evening, it was Friday, April 5th. It lasted all night long. And I'm there as a child holding my father's hand. And then in an instant, I grew up. And that's that switch that happened.
Yeah.
And just incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
And so yeah, there was those 2 evenings were
transformative.
Transformative.
Yeah. Your aha moments, as we sometimes say.
Yeah.
Stuart Tillman has written a series of books that are very, very powerful, very, very impactful. They document his personal journey, and they also explore the Bible. They fall under the heading of The Story You Find Yourself In. That's the series name. The first book is called The Story You Find Yourself In, Part 1. The second book is From Genesis to Revelation, A Story You Find Yourself In. And the third installment is about to come out. You held it up before. What's the name of it, Stuart?
It's Genesis and
the Hidden Allegory and Man's Descent into the Matrix.
Yeah.
The story you find yourself in. Powerful books, a great exploration of his life, but it will give you a moment to reflect upon your own life and how your journey on this planet, spiritually and physically, will become transformative. Wonderful books, highly recommended. Stuart, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.